Hi everyone, so this is probably the most vague video that I'm going to record. This is all about assessment and grading in Key Stage 3, and this is where I think we, along with the scheme of work, have got a lot of freedom, and I really don't want to dictate to staff exactly how things work. However, we all have to be on the same page, so some of the stuff which you see on this presentation, it could be subject to change. These are some, particularly the numbers involved, are some suggestions. So we'll kind of jump into it and see how we assess, or how we think we'd like to assess in Key Stage 3. And by all means, this is the stuff where I really do value teacher input. So if you've got some thoughts on this and if there's something obvious which you think needs to be changed, please do feel free to let me know. So you can see here on the screen, this is again suggested weightings of different activities which would count towards the grades at years 7, 8 and 9. And you'll notice that we are proposing generating scores from 3 different areas per year group. For 7, 8 and 9, for 7 and 8, we have something called an online quiz and a paper quiz. And then we have the idea of project work, which we expect to be done at home, again, TBC. You'll notice here that in year 7, we're putting more weighting on the project work. That's because we really do want to look at relieving the pressure on our year 7s. Again, a lot of the feedback we got from year 7 was that we were assessing them a lot, and assessments came in the form of big tests. So we want to kind of break that down a little bit and relieve the pressure on them. However, we're aware that as we work towards year 10, those assessments are going to become important, so we do need to factor that in at some point. So you'll notice here in year 7, we have something called a Caboodle online quiz. I'll talk to you about what that is in a second. We have the paper quiz, and then we have project work and homework, and these are weighted at 25, 25, and 50. Okay, we've then suggested that that weighting changes slightly for year 8, whereby those quizzes start to take a little bit more prominence. However, there's still project work. And in year 9, there's something slightly different. We have the Caboodle quizzes, and then we also have IGCSE questions. We have the facility to start looking at IGCSE style stuff in year 9. And the idea there is that they could be introduced to some IGCSE style questions, probably as a homework task, which will then count towards their grade. Okay, so like I say, the numbers are not fixed. If you're sitting there as a group and you think, oh, these are a bit weird, we came up with these at the end of the year. I've had a little play with them myself. I really want teacher input here because I don't want to be dictating to you guys about how we do this. What's more important for me is what I mean by each of these certain things. So I'm going to focus mainly just now on Caboodle online quizzes and the paper quizzes. So I'm just going to come into Caboodle. Where is it? It's over here. Okay. When you go into Caboodle, if you go again, I'm using the Biology 7 cells topic. You'll notice that we've got all our resources here, and as I say, some of these will be uploaded onto Toddle. That's a job for us to do. If you go into the Assessment tab, you will see 2 different things. You'll see an end of chapter test paper. I'll talk about that in a second. And then you'll see this thing, which is a formative test. Now, this has changed its name over time, so we're kind of just calling it an online test, because online quiz, because that's the most consistent thing we can call it. You'll notice here, you get started doing it, okay, you take some questions. So in this one, you've got labeling to do, okay. In the next one, you've got bits where you're labeling again, okay. I've got a lot of labeling here. Okay, then you've got choosing the correct answer, etc. So it's very kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily simple. The questions do get harder as they go on. However, there's not a lot of writing to do here. This is more just knowledge checks, etc. This is what we will call the online quiz. This should be done at the end of a unit, okay, just to sort of check in where students are at. And I am quite happy for this to be done at home. Previously, this was done in lessons. However, it results in a lot of time of students spending their time just in front of a screen, and that's not what we want to see in our Key Stage 3 lessons all the time. We want them to be active and doing things. It's very fine for them to be doing this at home. Obviously, that will result in high scores. Fine. That is absolutely fine for us. We have quite high grade boundaries in science, as we'll see in a second. And also, this is not the highest weighting that we can be doing. Okay, so for each of the units in a block, remember we had those blocks from Key Stage 3, would have one of these quizzes in there. The nice thing about these quizzes is that once you do them, you can see where students have had some issues. So you can see a slide-by-slide breakdown of each student's answers, and you can see, for example, which ones need to be retaught. You could design follow-up activities, raise activities, which might help them revise for the next element, which would be their written paper. Now, the written paper is slightly different. It's going to require a bit of work on our part. The written paper is going to come from here, but each written paper I want to take at the end of each block. So the written paper for the first block, we've got 7B1 and 7B2, will come from this, but it'll also come from the body systems paper. So there's a job for us to do in terms of pulling questions from each of these test papers. We don't need to do the whole thing. Okay, let's have a little look. Whoops, so that's a good sign, isn't it? Let's see if I click again. This should bring me to a download. There we go. Okay. If I open up that, okay, you'll see the types of questions, and again, some of it is, quite low-level stuff. However, we've got explaining questions. We've got describing process of gas exchange, etc. So the idea will be that our year 7 teachers in this case would take bits of this assessment, of this quiz, I keep on using the wrong word, sorry about that, and the CELS quiz, and put it together to make one kind of composite paper. So we're testing across a knowledge base. Yeah. Now, if you're not sure what questions to choose, okay, it's obviously worthwhile just having a look at the paper, and I think most teachers will agree on levels of difficulty. We want a range of difficulties. However, actually, if we look at the answer schemes, you are given an idea of the level of the questions in there inside the mark scheme. So you'll notice here that question 1A was a developing question, B was deemed as secure, and as you go through, they kind of get ramped. So 3 has got a lot of extending stuff in there. Really, we want a balance in there. If I was, ignore that noise, I'm not sure what's going on. If I was to kind of go on to one end of it, I'd be looking at the secure to extending. I find that a lot of the Kerboodle online quizzes are very much in the developing range. You have a lot of questions which are labeling, etc. So absolutely a few of these is fine. We could be more prescriptive if you want me to sort of lay down a number and say we must have this number of marks coming from secure, etc. That's fine. And it should be possible for us to complete this assessment in one lesson. So the expectation really is that students will spend one lesson out of the block. Remember, a block is 21 lessons, doing an assessment, doing a quiz. The rest of the time is active lessons, it's doing things, it could be reviewing, it could be learning new content depending on what the students need. Okay, so just back to my original paper here, that's the two things there. So when we talk about a Kerboodle online quiz, we're talking about those formative quizzes, 25% in the case of year 7. And then the paper quiz, that would be a composite paper encompassing 2 units for year 7 and maybe 8, and then 3 units for year 9. Again, a reminder that in year 9, in year 10, we sit assessments with biology, chemistry, and physics content. So I think it's a really good preparation for our year 9s to get used to that at this stage. Okay, now we come to the other bits. Now, this is, again, I'm not going to be very helpful at all here. Project work. Historically, we've looked at doing projects throughout our year 7, 8, and 9, and it's been quite inconsistent. Now, projects, this is where I'm kind of looking for teachers to use their ingenuity, to use their creativity. This could be kind of anything. So in the past, we've done things like when we're using the force topic in year 7, I asked my students to use recycled objects to create a force meter, a Newton meter. They had to create it, they had to calibrate it, and then they had to use it to tell me the mass of an unknown object, for example. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'll be upfront, we don't have these existing right now. However, Toddle, I think, is going to be a really nice way forward for that. The idea would be that we can talk as a team about the kinds of things we might do and use our shared experiences, and hopefully have a few ideas that can be creative. We then create a rubric from Toddle, not by ourselves, which will then allow us to mark our project work. The idea for year 7 and 8 would be that these would be done as homework. So I'm deliberately not giving loads of information here. I'll see if I can dig out an example like the one that I just said about the force meter. However, I'm not sure where that is right now. It's in somewhere on Firefly, so I'll have to have a bit of a dig through. For year 9, it's slightly different. We think that they would really benefit from an exposure to some IGCSE style questions, purely so they can just get used to the framing. I think students in IGCSE, they get a bit confused about the types of things being asked, so I think a bit of early exposure is helpful. Now this is where I'm going to go back to our links. I've put here a link to something called the CIE School Support Hub. This is a GCSE resource, but it's one that we can use for Key Stage 3. Inside here, and again, I won't do it right now because in the interest of time, you can go on here to something called Test Maker, and Test Maker is something which will allow you to kind of generate some questions for the purposes of our year 9s, and they could be doing them at home. You could be setting up an online quiz, etc. Again, I'm letting the year groups kind of decide that themselves. However, the expectation with all assessments should be really clear is that they are the same across the board. So those paper assessments, those online assessments, and the projects should be common across years 7, 8, and 9. Now, just on a final point, and again, students get really worried about this grading. Obviously, we take these numbers and we turn them into grades, and my hope is that Toddle will be good for doing that. These weightings, when we finally decide on what we really are happy with, we can stick them in Toddle, and to be honest, I think we can play around with them. They should come out with grades. Now, as we are aware, we operate on a system of an 8-point system with advanced plus being the highest and commenced being the lowest. And typically, our parents want advanced plus. So I'm just going to show you right now what for us this looks like. Okay, historically, and again, this is a guideline, we have put advanced pluses at our 95% mark. Okay, now that is designed to be hard to get. We've reflected that there are some expectations from parents, particularly in science. Science is one of real pressure, but they expect year 7s to be getting advanced plus from the get-go. We are going to have to challenge that a little bit, and my aim will be to send out some information to parents at the beginning of year 7 to kind of just temper that expectation at this stage. You'll notice here I've done a very simple breakdown here, and again, this is malleable. However, it is something that we'll have to do sort of together if we want to change. But the general message here is that if a student wants to be getting an advanced plus, they need to be at the 95 and up. Advanced is 90, and then we go down in 10s for secure and secure plus, 15s for developing and developing plus, and then commenced and commenced plus are really those sort of lower percentages there. Now, I've put here a grade map. I've really done this just to say where we might like to get going. I'd love to know, and this is going to involve a bit of analysis on my part or on some of the systems that we have, about how our grades map firstly to GCSE grades and then to our IB and A level. And that's not something I can do straight away. It's going to take a bit of work. However, I'd love it if we could come out and say that advanced plus maps to an A star. That'd be great. The reality is probably that it doesn't exactly. However, we're setting these high standards because we do not want it to be easy for a student to get advanced plus in science. If we're saying students are advanced plus, that really is suggesting that they're the creme de la creme, they're really a top-notch student, and we want to make sure that our that our standards in this regard are quite high. Like I say, that's something that I'll have to have a discussion with. However, it's definitely something that you will be communicating with the students, that getting a secure in science is not bad. It's pretty good. We should be happy with that. However, this is what we can do to reach that secure plus. Okay, obviously we will have students who do fantastically in everything, high flyers. We do have a lot of them, and part of our remit this year is to look at challenging those students, stretching them and stretching even further. However, that's not a discussion to be had for now. So a reiteration, as you'll have picked up there, I'm really keen to make sure that we know that these numbers are not set in stone. Okay, these are not dictated to us by anyone other than ourselves, so we can change them. If you are sitting there and you're a year 7 teacher and you're going, oh, I think that's a bit too much, that's my natural inclination, a bit too much on the projects, I think we need to put a bit more on here, fine. If you're sitting there going for year 8, there's not enough on projects and homework, then absolutely make your voice heard. hopefully at the beginning, so we can make this established. However, like even during the year, it's fine to change our attack when we reflect on our practice and realize that something may or not be suitable. So like I say, this is very much a work in progress. I look forward to hearing your inputs on this, and we'll be having some time to discuss that in our departments. That's enough of me babbling. Thank you very much for watching.